Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to look at Advaita Vedanta, which is a Hindu spiritual philosophy that emphasizes non-dualism. It is a philosophy that may, from one vantage point, seem obscure to the Western mind. However, as more and more people are going through spiritual awakenings, the teachings of Vedanta are, whether they know it or not, slowly turning into lived reality for many. Advaita Vedanta is not a philosophy to be grasped through the intellect alone, but rather a subtle and transformative lens through which the entire fabric of reality begins to rearrange itself. What makes Advaita Vedanta especially potent in the context of spiritual awakening is its unflinching assertion that liberation is not a future goal, not a distant peak to be scaled, but the very ground of one's being already fully present. The tradition is often traced back to the Upanishads, which are ancient Indian texts that form the philosophical backbone of Hindu thought. These texts explore the nature of self and consciousness in a poetic, often cryptic language, which was later distilled and clarified by the 8th century teacher Adi Shankara. Shankara didn't create Advaita Vedanta out of thin air. Rather, he gathered, interpreted, and systematized centuries of wisdom, illuminating a path that had already been walked in silence by many mystics and sages. The core message, however, remains radically simple. The self that you take yourself to be, with its habits, history, and desires, is not the ultimate self. Beneath all appearances and identities lies something indivisible, eternal, and utterly still. This is the only true reality, shared by all in eternal oneness, and it is thus what you are. You can find this same message echoed in the teachings of many modern spiritual teachers, such as Eckhart Tolle and Michael Singer. In Advaita Vedanta, the apparent division between the self and the world is considered to be a result of ignorance, or avidya. This ignorance is not merely the absence of information, but a deep misapprehension of reality, like mistaking a rope for a snake in the dim light of dusk. The rope was always a rope, the snake was only a projection. Likewise, the finite self, bounded by skin, history, and thought, is an appearance projected upon the screen of undivided awareness. To awaken spiritually in this view is not to become something new, but to cease misidentifying with the projection. The one who seeks liberation is already liberated, and the act of seeking itself, ironically, becomes the final veil. This is not to say that realization is easy for most, even if there are examples of those for whom the veil has been lifted in an instant, never to return. The teachings recognize that the illusion of separateness runs deep. It is not undone by a single epiphany or clever insight. It must be met again and again, gently but with uncompromising clarity. The traditional path within Vedanta involves listening to the teachings, contemplating them deeply, and absorbing them through meditation and direct self-inquiry. The goal is not to collect spiritual ideas, but to dismantle every assumption that veils the truth of who you are. One of the most transformative aspects of Advaita Vedanta is its insistence on the unity of being. There is no real duality between the knower and the known, between the inner and the outer. What we take as the world of objects is, in fact, not separate from consciousness itself. This leads to a paradox. You are not in the world. The world is in you, not as a person, but as awareness. This is not a metaphor or a poetic flourish, but a literal description from the perspective of direct experience. When one begins to taste this truth, even in glimpses, a strange and subtle revolution takes place. Fear begins to evaporate, not because life becomes easier, but because the fundamental misunderstanding that gave rise to fear starts to dissolve. What remains is a kind of spaciousness, a peace that does not depend on outcomes, and a love that does not seek reward. When you know that your only true nature is infinite consciousness, and that nothing can ever change that, What is there to fear? Things can happen to the body or the mind, but nothing can ever harm that which you truly are. Let this sink in for a moment. Reflect on it. Keep it at the back of your mind as you face the challenges that life brings you, not as something to condemn yourself for when you fail to live it, but rather as a truth that can be allowed to sink in on its own with every breath you take. In the early stages, this teaching can feel disorienting. The ego, which thrives on goals, comparisons, and control, finds nothing to hold on to in non-duality. There is no method for achieving what you already are. There is no practice that will produce your own being. Advaita doesn't offer comfort in the conventional sense. It offers truth, which often arrives like a lightning bolt through the structures we've built to protect ourselves. But once the storm passes, what you will discover is a freedom that is gentler than any comfort could ever be, a freedom that includes everything and excludes nothing. Advaita Vedanta has often been misunderstood as a purely intellectual philosophy, or as an excuse to bypass emotional or ethical work. In reality, it is neither dry nor escapist. It does not deny the world. It simply denies that the world is separate from you. It doesn't deny suffering. It reveals suffering's root in false identification. This recognition can be deeply compassionate. When you see that the same awareness lives in every being, ethics are no longer rules to be followed, but spontaneous expressions of love and clarity. The teachings of sages such as Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj exemplify how Advaita can be lived without fanfare or religious trappings. Ramana often pointed seekers toward the simple question, "Who am I?" not as a philosophical riddle, but as a gateway to silence. When asked about elaborate practices, rituals, or beliefs, he returned again and again to stillness and inquiry. Nisargadatta, on the other hand, spoke in raw, piercing terms about the false self and the illusion of time. He once said, "You are not the body. You are not even the mind. You are the light in which they both appear." These words are not meant to be memorized. They are meant to be verified through your own attention. Many people today speak of spiritual awakening in terms of energy shifts, inner journeys, or cosmic downloads. While these experiences can be meaningful, Advaita points beyond all experience to the formless ground in which all experiences arise and dissolve. It points to the witnessing presence that never comes or goes, that cannot be grasped, yet is always here. This is not a realm of visions or altered states, even though those also can be meaningful. It is the quiet immediacy of what is. Awakening in this sense is not dramatic. It is sober, ordinary, and intimate. It is seeing things as they are without the filter of me. Applying Advaita Vedanta in daily life does not mean rejecting the world or renouncing relationships. It means bringing the light of awareness into every moment and recognizing that what you are seeking is already present, even in mundane situations. Washing dishes, talking to a friend, or sitting in traffic, all of these become opportunities to notice the simple beingness that underlies all appearances. You begin to live not as a role or a personality, but as presence itself. This is not achieved through effort, but through noticing what has always been the case. This is also worth contemplating. You don't have to change your outward appearance at all to live this philosophy. If you think that there is anything you have to do whatsoever, you are missing the point. You can make the shift of experiencing life through pure awareness without changing anything on the outside. You don't have to suddenly give off an air of being more spiritual, or become bland and ordinary to show that you don't care about your outward appearance anymore. All this entails is the deep knowing that none of this has anything to do with your true nature. Over time, the line between spiritual practice and life begins to blur. You no longer meditate to reach some state. Meditation becomes indistinguishable from living. You no longer search for meaning in thoughts or narratives. Meaning reveals itself in the very fabric of existence. Even suffering becomes less threatening, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer personal. Emotions arise and fall in the same sky of awareness. The drama of life continues, but the one who was caught in it begins to vanish like mist in sunlight. This teaching, though radical in its implications, does not ask you to believe anything. It only asks you to look clearly, directly, and honestly at what you take yourself to be, and then to keep looking until the looking itself disappears and only being remains. That being is not yours or mine. It is not limited to a body or a story. It is what sees through your eyes right now. It is what hears these words. It is not an object of knowledge, but the knowing itself. In summary, Advaita Vedanta is not a rejection of the world, the self, or experience, but a revelation of their true nature. It invites us to see clearly, to rest as the awareness in which all things arise, and to live from the freedom that has always been present. Through this gentle but radical shift in perception, the illusion of separation dissolves, not by force, but through recognition. And what remains is wholeness, clarity, and love, shining through everything. Finally, it's important to emphasize that, as with many teachings, we need to be wary of the conclusions we draw from Advaita Vedanta. We've been talking about how life, even though something shifts at the very core when we see through the illusions, may continue as usual on the outside. What this means is that, even if everyone is free to draw their own conclusions if they want to, non-dualism does not necessarily entail the annihilation of the experience of a separate self. It only means that we see through the illusion of the separate self and the false identity that has been built around it. You are not being asked to let go of life or of anything that is truly valuable to you. Why would God or Source deny a part of itself anything? You are being invited to see life as it is, free from the hunger to possess it. The self you think you are cannot survive that seeing. But what remains is not a void. It is the fullness from which everything arises. In this light, creation is not negated. It is not for nothing. It is the play of the one exploring itself, expressing itself, loving itself, through all the seeming selves. And even though individuality is ultimately not real in the way we think it is relatively real. The wave is not denied. It just stops forgetting that it is also the ocean. It stops clinging to all that it is not. And separation begins to become a place from which oneness can be experienced more fully. If you want to explore the non-dualist teachings further, one of the finest teachers who spoke on the subject with the most compassion and clarity is the aforementioned Ramana Maharshi. We have a video that will give you an introduction to his teachings, written in a way that makes them easier to comprehend for the Western mind. You are invited to check it out. You can see it on the end screen right now, together with 2 videos about Eckhart Tolle's teachings, which also move in the same realm. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.